This then is a continuation of the video in which I made this effect, which is a sort of true ambience generated gel light, where the gel light projects an image onto the surface of whatever is around through use of optics. So this transience optimized light is a glass-like material, which is how the image is focused through refraction. One of the drawbacks of using a material that's like glass, I would say drawbacks, but one thing that Bryce does for you when you add refraction over 100 is it also generates reflection. So we'll just turn the ambience down to nothing. Remember that it was set at 2, and you'll see that there is a grazing angle reflection added in here. And in this case we don't really need that. That's just adding render time because it's incorporating reflection into the light gathering process. So the feelers come out and then some of them getting reflected off the surface of this, which we don't want. We want them to be focused anyway, and it's only a subtle effect. So how do we stop the reflection on the surface of this? Well, there are several ways of doing this. I'm just going to show you another one. We use a hypermaterial. We use this one we've already made in the last video. So if I hold down shift and click on that, I can add this to somewhere in the library, which I've already done, but I'll do it again to show you how you do it. So there you go, I've added that in, and then I'll check out of here, and what I'm going to do is put a blob in diffuse and a blob in reflection. Turn the diffusion and the reflection up to 100, hold down the shift key, bring in this material. Now at the moment that's a positive value, but I'm going to modify it in the texture source editor and just switch it to component 1, which is a high output negative value. And the consequence of this is that by having a negative diffusion balanced against high output negative reflection, you can kill the reflection on the outside of this material. And you'll see that Bryce has helpfully thrown in some specular effects, so we'll just set the specular and the specular halo to fully black. So what this means is that we can have the diffuse colour at a full white, which means there's no attenuation of any of the paths through this material, but we now have no reflection now. So if you remember in the last video that this took about 30 minutes to render, about 28 minutes, something like that. So now it's fully black, so that's not going to help, is it? So I've made a mistake there. Edit procedural, Y, oh yes, I forgot to turn the ambience back up to 2, there you go. So you've got to imagine that there's no reflection there, even though it's now ambient, and we'll see what the render time is like. Okay, so that's now down to 23 minutes, so that's shaved a bit more off for us. Something else you could do, as I suggested in the last video, is reduce the maximum ray depth. That will reduce the light slightly, but it will again reduce the render time, so we're now down to about 13-12 minutes. And if that's been reduced, go back into the material and increase the ambient output. I'll double it. See what we get now. Okay, that's a bit bright. We could try taking the ray depth down one more, but I don't know if that's going to work. It still works, but it's going to be a very direct effect with the transience because we've only got one step in the light gathering process. So the shadow production will not be that impressive, but as you can see the render time is much lower. Noise levels are rather high, but there's a price to be paid whenever you reduce render time. What's going to happen is that in the corners here there will be less chance of light on this one face being transferred to the other by the light gathering process. So probably that's going a bit far. Best thing to do is to, I don't know, choose a 3. Let's try 3. A bit too bright. Modify the material. I'll set it back down to, let's say, 3 for example. See how that looks? Okay, so this render time is 16 minutes, so it's about half what it was in the last example. So with a little bit of care it's possible to reduce the render time quite a bit. The other things you could do, if you knew you'd got no reflection in your scene anyway, then you could turn off reflection in the render options, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that because you'll probably want to incorporate more interesting materials than I have in this example. So at the moment this is just default Bryce grey for the dragon and the box that were inside. But obviously that's not the most interesting thing to render. It just provides an easy to interpret background for these videos. So there you go, that's the end of the video. Hope you found that interesting, useful, and that you'll have a go at experimenting with these hypertextures and true ambience lighting in your own renders.